Hello, and welcome to the Spring Creek Relocation Assistance webinar. Spring Creek Park was home to 27 families in the Evergreen area near Kalispell, a long-standing manufactured home community located in the 100-year floodplain. In late 2023, the property was sold. By April 2024, residents received a 180-day eviction notice. The letter stated that all tenant-owned homes must be removed from the premises, and the legal action would follow if they weren't. When we pulled the tax records, we found 24 of the 27 homes were too old and fragile to survive a move. To make things worse, nearly all nearby parks were full or had age restrictions that ruled out older homes. This was very stressful for the households to receive these notices and understand that they had 180 days to not only relocate to new housing, but be able to afford that new housing and the removal of their existing home. This timeline required households to move out in November 2024, when weather could potentially permit homes from being moved. As we look at the current housing landscape in Montana, we're seeing a growing strain, especially for lower and moderate income households. First, the widening age gap continues to make it harder for working families to keep up. While housing costs have risen sharply across the state, wages simply haven't kept pace. This means that even those with steady jobs are finding it increasingly difficult to afford stable housing. In the Flathead area in particular, limited housing availability is driving this pressure even further. Vacancy rates are extremely low, and the competition for affordable options is intense. For many households, manufactured housing communities have been one of the few remaining sources of naturally affordable housing. But even within these communities, residents are facing challenges. The depreciating value of manufactured homes means that when residents need or want to move, they often can't sell their home for anywhere near what they've put into it. Their main asset doesn't appreciate like a traditional home. It often loses value, leaving families with few options. And finally, the cost of relocating a manufactured home is another major barrier. Moving a home can cost up to $10,000, not to mention the risks of damage or the difficulty of finding a new lot to move to. For low-income households, that's simply out of reach. Altogether, these factors compound to create a significant instability for residents, people who are working hard but struggling to maintain safe, affordable housing in a market that's increasingly difficult to navigate. This story represents a growing trend: redevelopment pressure, limited land, aging housing stock, and widening wage gap. These systemic factors are forcing residents out of stable, affordable homes statewide. Another important factor to recognize is that the local social service programs are already operating at or beyond capacity. Agencies in the Flathead are stretched thin, meeting the needs of the existing community, everything from housing support and food assistance to mental health and transportation. If 26 families were suddenly displaced and had to rely on these existing resources, it would overburden an already maxed out system, leaving both these families and others in the community without help that they need. This really underscores how critical it is that we've found a solution that prevents displacement in the first place. So at NeighborWorks Montana, our mission is to build stability in strong communities. We knew we had to act quickly, even though relocation assistance wasn't something we had done before. So that's where the Spring Creek Relocation Initiative began, a way to help residents move safely with dignity and as much control as possible over their next chapter. So the initial steps of building this initiative, our team met with the residents in May of 2024 to assess the needs and gather data through intake surveys. So we were looking for household size, income, housing costs, and where they hoped to go next. We then took that information and started creating the Relocation Assistance Program for implementation. The next step, our team started reaching out to partner organizations in the area and quickly had commitments to assist in this effort. The Whitefish Community Foundation awarded a $45,000 emergency response grant and committed to fundraising an additional $107,500 for a total of $150,000 in support from their foundation and their donors. Without the Whitefish Community Foundation's quick commitment to partner on this effort, and their astounding ability to mobilize fundraising, we simply would not have been able to provide the level of assistance or achieve the success we did with this program. The Montana Community Foundation contributed $7,000 for admin costs to NeighborWorks Montana, and NeighborWorks America provided funding to support survey and case study design. So as far as the entire initiative timeline, April 2024 to June 2025, Whitefish Community Foundation began fundraising in mid-May 2024, and NeighborWorks Montana did outreach with local media. With this effort, we achieved the fundraising goal in just 6 weeks, which was really amazing. We began deploying funds to households in June 2024. In August, residents received an extension from their landlord on the eviction notices to March 2025. So they had almost a full year to relocate at that point, which was fantastic. Our team performed quarterly surveys, checking in on the households and providing incentives for those completed throughout the timeline. In April 2025, we deployed the last relocation assistance funds. And in June 2025, we completed the final surveys with the households and deployed the last incentives for those surveys completed. So the demographics of the residents at Spring Creek, there are 26 households in total that we helped. One household did move out before we could reach them, and we never received any contact information for them. Of that total 27 that lived there at the time the eviction notices went out. The incomes ranged widely within the park. 20 households owned their homes, 15 of which were free and clear. And there were 47 adults and 27 children, consisting of 8 seniors, 9 residents with disabilities, and 2 veterans. There were 5 children with disabilities, and most households were working families. Here's how the fund worked. Families developed their own relocation plans depending on their needs. NeighborWorks Montana paid vendors directly for transparency and accountability. And throughout the process, we conducted quarterly follow-up surveys with residents offering small gift card incentives. For the houses that were moving to a new housing, we provided up to a $5,000 housing stipend. For those relocating their existing homes, we were offering $10,000 to help them get that to a new place. Making the funds flexible for households to determine their own path for housing was important. An apartment locally or a rented manufactured home is not the same as a manufactured home owned by someone with their own 4 walls and a yard. And NeighborWorks Montana did not feel it was our place to determine where or how the households should relocate. So funds could be used for anything that supported that household's relocation. The key concerns we had, and for the residents, I think when we reached out to the residents, their biggest concern was about their liability of removing the existing home in the park on top of the requirements to relocate and all the other factors they had to consider depending on the household situation. So we negotiated with the park owner to let families transfer their home titles over to him instead of paying for the removal. So this avoided major financial hardship and allowed the owner to make those site improvements and proceed with those faster. The partnerships and negotiated solutions made it possible for every household to find safe housing, something that would not have been possible without flexible collaborative funding. So now that we've covered how the fund worked, Adam will walk through the case study findings and the impact that it had on the families' lives.
All right. Hi, everybody. Adam Paschal, Rock Acquisition Specialist at NeighborWorks Montana. So I'm going to walk you through those follow-up surveys that I did with the residents and then the case study that we assembled out of those surveys afterwards. So as part of the relocation assistance program, I conducted quarterly follow-up surveys with all of the Spring Creek Park residents to track different questions about their lives, their jobs, their living situations, and how all of those were being impacted by the eviction, and also how they were being impacted by the relocation assistance fund. So residents were incentivized to complete the surveys with gift cards, and I completed the surveys either over the phone or through email, kind of whatever worked best for the residents. The gift cards themselves actually kind of ended up becoming an additional crucial lifeline for a bunch of the families. and the quarterly check-ins also became something kind of akin to like an emotional pressure valve for folks. And throughout the process, I kind of had a feeling that I may have been the only person in their lives that was actually directly asking them how the eviction was impacting them based on the responses I was getting from the residents. So the key findings of the surveys were compiled into a case study, and we hope that the case study will provide policymakers and service providers with some information about what happens when a manufactured home park closes and what can be done to help the residents of those closed parks. So feel free to take a second to scan the QR code. There's also going to be another QR code at the end of the presentation. And then the information can also be found on the homepage of our website, nwmt.org. You just have to scroll down a little bit. And you'll find a summary of the case study and also a handy infographic. And you're welcome to share those out with other folks. So the single most important question that we were trying to answer throughout all of the follow-up surveys was, did the relocation assistance keep people out of homelessness? And the answer to that main question was yes. The relocation assistance did keep people out of homelessness. So as you can see, 26 out of the 27 families were able to relocate to new housing. Some folks were able to purchase traditional stick-built homes. Some folks transitioned to other types of manufactured housing, either on like other people's land, families' land, or in other parks. Some folks transitioned into apartments, and then some moved in with family, and there were a couple people who ended up living in weatherized campers. There's one family that isn't included here, the one out of the 27. That's because they moved out so quickly after receiving the eviction notice that we weren't never able to contact them, and we don't know where they ended up. So the impacts on the Spring Creek Park residents varied pretty widely, but there was a common thread throughout of a consistent feeling of loss amongst the families. Quite a few lost income from needing to relocate or because they weren't able to work as much as they had before, just because of the overwhelming stress of being evicted. Some people in the community lost their marriages or long-term partnerships in the upheaval. And quite a few people mentioned to me the loss of community that they had with their neighbors in Spring Creek Park and the loss of their support networks from being forced away from friends and family. So there was also a huge financial loss in not being able to keep the homes that they'd improved and maintained for years, or sometimes for some of the folks in there for decades. And in some cases, people had put tens of thousands of dollars into those homes. One resident told me that he had put thousands of dollars into new driveway gravel and into a landscaping project around his house. This is work that the park owner saw happening with his own eyes. Unfortunately, that resident received his eviction notice just a few months after his big project was completed. So one of the questions that we asked was about the financial confidence of folks after the eviction. The vast majority of families were less confident about their ability to save money and less confident about their ability to handle a financial crisis after the eviction. Interestingly, there wasn't a correlation between people's level of confidence here in the chart and their level of income or type of housing they moved into. So that reduction in confidence really cut across everybody's level of incomes and the types of housing that they moved into. A lot of the residents described a shift in their social connections after the eviction. Fortunately, most of the people that we worked with were able to stay in the Kalispell area and maintain the same schools, some folks the same churches, and just their social ties overall. But some folks did end up out of state and faced completely new social environments. And even the folks who were able to stay in the area and didn't have to move very far, described negative impacts to their social lives. A few residents described some positive health outcomes after moving out of Spring Creek Park. That was mostly having to do with them having mold in their previous home. But quite a few folks detailed challenges that stemmed mostly from the stress of losing their home, and that those were both physical and mental health challenges. So families told me about things like depression and anxiety, heart and lung issues, loss of appetite, an inability to afford nutritious food and their medication. A resident told me that they were experiencing a loss of trust in society and other individuals and had a new negative perspective on humanity as a whole. And several residents did confide in me that they had contemplated suicide since the eviction. So, despite all those ongoing challenges that the former residents of Spring Creek Park continue to face, overall, we'd consider the relocation assistance program a highly successful intervention in a situation that really could have been much, much worse and had worse outcomes for the families. 26 of those households were able to relocate to new housing thanks to a pretty small investment through the money that was raised. So throughout those surveys, two of the questions that I asked during one of the rounds of follow-up surveys were, one, were you ever worried about becoming homeless due to the eviction? And two, what kind of situation do you think you'd be in if you did not have access to the relocation fund? So all but one of those respondents in that round of surveys told me that they were scared of becoming homeless after the eviction. So that's 18 out of 19 families that I talked to were afraid that they would become homeless due to being evicted from Spring Creek Park. And then four of those respondents told me that they definitely would have become homeless without the relocation fund. And fortunately, none of those families were left homeless after they were evicted. Some lessons learned throughout the process. A major one, trust building was key to helping the residents get a plan of action together and get them out of Spring Creek Park and directly into other housing. I think having Danielle's initial in-person meeting combined with consistent and responsive communication through those follow-ups helped a lot. Being flexible with the communication preferences really helped a lot in working through technology gaps. And those were sometimes, age-related technology gaps and just differences in the kinds of technology that people preferred to use. And then also just the basic ability to access certain kinds of technology. We're talking computers or smartphones, things like that. So taking the time to hear people out was a huge part of building the trusting relationships so that we could hear the residents' stories, help them feel supported throughout the process, and then also get good information about what they were going through. In fact, one of the most consistent pieces of feedback that I got from residents was about the consistent check-ins over that year-long period. So having the monetary assistance obviously was huge, but having somebody to talk to about their struggles, their worries, and their future plans for new housing was also essential. The money is what helped folks pay for the things that they needed. But what I heard was that the check-ins were what really made them feel like somebody had their back. So for next steps, we're going to be sharing the case study with anyone who's interested, and then talking with partners about any programming or policy changes that could help the community, the next community of evicted families to stay out of homelessness. And we're also going to keep an ear on the ground for other park closures or mass evictions happening in Montana. And we probably won't play the same kind of direct role that we have with Spring Creek Park, but probably at least collecting information about the situation and, trying to hear about any local efforts to help the evicted families. So this is NeighborWorks Montana's cooperative housing team. And normally our team's focus is on helping communities helping communities convert into resident-owned cooperatives, and then supporting those cooperatives in the long term. So relocation assistance is definitely not part of the work that we regularly do. Spring Creek Park for us was an opportunity to help a manufactured home community weather a mass eviction, but it's not necessarily something that we're really looking to replicate in-house again in the future. So that's why we're really focused on the future policy or partnership opportunities, and hopefully showing other organizations and communities one possible path for dealing with park closures or mass evictions. Back to you, Danielle.
Thanks, Adam. Before we wrap up today, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Whitefish Community Foundation. Alan, thank you so much. Your incredible partnership and support. This program was something new for us, a step into uncharted territory, and your faith in our ability to execute it made all the difference. Your quick commitment and trust gave us the confidence and resources to move forward and truly make an impact. I also want to thank Kaya, our executive director, and the NeighborWorks Montana board for their support and encouragement to Adam and I as we ran with this completely new effort. We also want to recognize and thank the donors and community members whose generosity powered this effort. The outpouring of support from this community was inspiring. It showed once again how deeply people care for their neighbors and the well-being of our region. We could not have done this without the Whitefish Community Foundation and the incredible people of the Flathead Valley and beyond. It made me feel really good about where I live and the work we do. So thank you. I will invite questions and reflections from everyone. Please raise your hand or type in the chat, please.
Thank you, guys. Not dry eyes. It's a really hard story to tell and to share, but also really powerful to be able to step in this way and work with such incredible community partners. So Adam and Danielle were amazing champions, as you can tell. Hopefully you've heard that through what they've shared today. And definitely had a passion for this that really showed and made a big impact. So what questions do folks have? I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can just see each other here. Looks like Daniel has a question. Go ahead, Daniel. Oh, and then go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the presentation and kind of learning more about how the process went. My question's around Adam, your role almost as like a case manager post-op, and just really seeing that is a really valuable service. And I'm just curious on how you guys think about how NeighborWorks Montana might be able to assist other organizations in either helping navigate and even, with the eviction services here, but also just broadly in the housing ecosystem. If you guys are thinking about other strategies that you guys might be able to plug in or do any training or just anything that might be able to help small organizations, help people in the long term there.
So I can respond maybe on NeighborWorks Montana's role, and then Adam, you want to chat, just share a little bit more about your role as ad hoc case manager. We're always here to stretch our skill sets. I think this is part of it for us, is just really making sure that we documented and shared this story. And we are talking about putting together a toolkit so that everyone could have access to the actual survey tools that we used, the way we documented it, that kind of stuff. And then I think, of course, our team is always available for sidebar one-on-one conversations. And we definitely, like Adam said, want to know when you're seeing these situations in your community and if there are ways that we can help support partners or bring people together to come up with solutions.
Yeah, and I think as far as kind of the ad hoc case management style follow-up that we did, I think probably the biggest takeaway is that, our advice to other organizations or communities who are facing this is that, the monetary intervention is super important. But it probably can't just be that. There needs to be some kind of help for the residents along the way to just chat through them and help them plan their next steps and um, deploy the money in a way that works for them. So I think that would be, consistent advice from us is to provide the money, but not just the money.
Right. Alan.
I was just going to say before the warm fuzzies left us, oftentimes I'd say fundraising feels like the hardest part, and it can be the most intimidating for this kind of thing. But I think it's the easiest once you have everything lined up. I mean, every T was crossed, every I was dotted from your perspective. And without NeighborWorks coming in with the experience, with the expertise, with the team, with the, just your history and track record, I don't think it would have come together as quickly as it did. So yes, we played a pretty big role in the fundraising. I think you gave us a little more credit than was due, Danielle. We put in the grant, and then through your press releases and everything else, it just kind of came together. I mean, we promoted the fund, and we got a $50,000 donation from a couple in Kalispell that we've never worked with before. That was totally inspired by you guys taking that leadership role. So I just wanted to say that if other groups are thinking about, raising the money, I think it's just really important to have the partnerships and the structure in place before you start asking people to give. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to jump in and make an impact.
Thanks, Alan. Erica, did you have something? I saw you come off mute earlier.
So I just wondered if there was any other avenues that people were able to pursue. Like, could people get a loan to move their mobile homes, or is that just not a thing that's available, or so out of the realm of the people that were in that predicament, that bank loans were not a possibility?
Yeah, so Adam and Danielle will be revisiting kind of what happened with homes and why.
Uh-huh. So and I know that if they were relocating a home, they got $10,000. Does that even cover the cost? I have no idea what it costs to move a mobile home these days.
And
Definitely
Erica,
depends
just
on how far
Uh-huh.
and the home and the mover and all the things. And then it's also, like, did you remove your skirting? Did you disconnect your utilities yourself? Can you connect your utilities yourself? Can you put skirting back on? All of those. And does your skirting survive being removed and put back on? Or do you need to buy new? Like, there's a million pieces to that make it more or less expensive. I say on average, 10,000 is going to cover it. Often, if you need skirting and those things, it's going to go way above that. I am not aware of any bank that loans for moving units. I think one thing that was encouraging that we've seen just locally in the Flathead was we did this, and we did get great media attention around the relocation assistance that we provided. And there is a park that received another eviction notice here in the Flathead up in Columbia Falls. And the park owner chose to give relocation assistance to the residents himself without outside intervention on that. And I can only feel like we incentivized that a little bit. Who knows if we really did, but that felt awesome to see that happening naturally without the pressure of media or us putting it on the owner. And so they really provided these eviction notices and said, if you're out within the next 3 months, we'll give you $10,000. And if you're out in 6 months, we'll give you 5. And it was actually really shocking how fast that park emptied out. I think it also really incentivized the residents for that. But that felt great that it was coming from the seller who planned to redevelop it and not from the community.
And then Adam, There was just one home that was relocated or attempted to be relocated. Is that right?
Yeah, eventually was, but yeah, the one home that we helped get moved out uh ended up becoming pretty chaotic for the family because the company that was paid to move the home um, cracked the home's frame uh, sometime in the moving process. And so the damage to the home was severe enough that it couldn't be placed and they couldn't live in it. And so they did end up living in a friend's garage for a little while the home was being repaired. The moving cost itself, I had down that we paid the contractor $4,800 to move the home, and then we also helped the family out with new skirting and kind of some building supplies. But their cost, just trying to bounce back from that, was significant.
Are there other questions or reactions folks have? Looks like Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ryan Pillsbury with Keller Williams, Northwest Montana, and really interested in seeing how COPs are developed to help, people kind of work together to, survive in the high price housing market we're in right now. My question was, did you do any research or have any information on when the park first went on the market? Was there an opportunity for the residents to form a COP or to be a little bit proactive and maybe working together to make an offer on the park internally, or was that not given to them as an option?
So when the park never went on the market, this was an off-market exchange that took place. But I live here, and so you hear all the things that are happening in the housing world as they're happening. So I did meet with the new owner, the buyer of the park, not long after he purchased it. And he had never invested in manufactured housing before. And he was unaware of the challenges associated with the 100-year floodplain and manufactured housing communities. Much like all of us, he is now learning the hard way what that looks like. So we have a policy internally and cannot get financing for a resident purchase of a park in the 100-year floodplain that has not been remediated because of the challenges around it. So I had visited with him about that. He was interested in a potential resident sale. And a lot of that is what prompted this eviction, was that he had to remediate that 100-year floodplain if he really wanted to sell the park sometime in the future. So, that's when he created this plan of removing all of the homes, putting in the elevated foundation so the homes would be out of the floodplain, and placing newer used homes on them and then renting them for the time being. So that is pretty much how he created his business plan around it. So somebody would be able to get financing on the park in the future, or a potential sale to the residents.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, our approach always will be, if it's to see if a community fits with the resident ownership, and to work with the seller or the owner to try to pursue that option. That's definitely our top priority. Preservation, maintaining housing, but not every property, not every park is going to be able to pursue that.
I would say this situation was really interesting too, because we did have a good relationship with the park owner. And that ultimately really helped the situation, because we were able to negotiate, the agreement where the residents signed over their homes, as opposed to having that responsibility to remove the homes. And then he then didn't have to go through the abandonment process on those homes to get ownership of them, if that was the case too. So I think there was some advantage there. And he also extended that eviction timeline pretty significantly for them. And so I think those two things were great for the residents.
That's a good point. Other questions? Marcy?
I was a little late, so I'm sorry if this was covered, but I'm just curious if, like, did you guys talk about who, outside of Neighborhood Works or NeighborWorks would be, an ideal candidate to do sort of the consulting piece or the assistance piece? I know every community in Montana is different, and we have different resources, but is there somebody that you guys see as playing that role locally? Because I know, like, when some of the parks closed in Missoula, I know, like, Lowell School, Family Resource Center helped people, and there's just different resources out there. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, great question, Marcy. I think every community is going to be different, like you pointed to, and hopefully what we've shared will help inspire communities to kind of think about that for themselves, like what are our opportunities and our options. We have supported relocation situations in the past in different ways. So in Missoula, there was a community that closed a number of years ago. And in that case, we worked with the local land trust. So we worked with Front Step, we worked with the local housing authority, we worked with the Housing Resource Council, or the Human Resource Council, and brought all those partners together and did sort of a resource fair and helped residents apply for housing vouchers or for housing authority units, and helped residents navigate their options. We also put together a toolkit of manufactured home resident resources. So there's different ways to support residents. And my point in answering your question is just that I think there are a lot of different organizations who have a potential role to play or are already working with residents in these communities. So those are some of the ones we've worked with previously.
And then my other question for Whitefish, for Alan, did you guys just make a grant to NeighborWorks and you gave money to individuals, or how did that work?
That's an important distinction. We held the fund, and it was important to our board, and I think to some of the donors, that we did not do the cash payments. And so we held the money basically until NeighborWorks spent it, and we reimbursed NeighborWorks. And so we were, pretty relaxed on the reporting side of it, but our donors and our board wanted some level of accountability, holding NeighborWorks accountable and just making sure that they're paying those vendors directly. So Danielle would send us just a spreadsheet that said, what type of assistance was spent in the last 3 months, and then what the total was, and then we would just make a grant to reimburse them for those expenses.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And then we did talk about too in the beginning, let's say we raised more than what was needed. Well, then what? Well, we restricted it to support housing efforts in Flathead County. And so the donors felt some assurance that, okay, if we overshoot the need, which actually happened, we had extra money in the fund, which we granted to Samaritan House at the end of so we wanted to close out the fund. We didn't want to sit on that money anymore. So we made a grant to Samaritan House to close it out. And I think it was like 19,000 that was left over. That sound about right. So they were able to use that for their housing project.
That's great. Thanks.
Nick.
Do you foresee a trend in this at all, or actually have done any sort of like analysis to existing communities and the threat of closure? I'm just trying to gauge, like, what's the real pressure in Montana at this point, as you see sort of aging infrastructure within these communities, as well as aging homes in addition to.
Yeah, we haven't done a forward look, and the data is hard to track. We've tried. We've gotten data from the state of every park, and we've tried to look at it year to year to see what parks have closed, but it's really hard to analyze that data consistently. We know anecdotally, because people tell us when these things are happening. We know generally when parks are closing, and it is happening regularly. I don't think it's like hundreds of homes a year, but it is dozens. And when we're looking at just the landscape and the market in Montana, I do think one of the types of communities that are very difficult for NeighborWorks Montana to help are any that are fewer than 10 homes, and really even any that are fewer than 25 homes is much harder to make work for resident ownership. So we do have a lot of concern and question about what are the supports for those smaller communities. We see a lot of that in Missoula. There are a lot of small, 2, 3, 4 homes that are very likely to be redeveloped because they're in urban centers, close to resources, high property value, and those homes are really old and probably going to be hard to save. So I think we know there will be a lot of impacts to residents. The other thing that I think Adam noted is there is some interest in state level policy. So one of our board members who's a state legislator, George Nikolakakis, did draft a policy recommendation or a bill in the 2025 session to establish a relocation assistance fund at the state specifically for manufactured housing community residents. And I think we'll be looking at that again in the 2027 session and seeing if there's something that we could support and pursue there. So we know there's a need. We don't know the scale of the need.
I also want to use this time as a plug for our map that is on our website. And I just put the link in the chat. Our team has worked really hard on this beautiful manufactured housing map that we update every year with Department of Revenue data, because it is very hard to know the status of parks in the state of Montana with our records and the sharing that is allowed with property. And so you can go onto this site, you can look in your specific community, you can see if they're manufactured housing communities, if they are resident-owned communities, or if they are closed parks. So it is awesome to be able to see that data of like how many parks have closed in your area too. And this is something we update annually with that DOR data, and think it's a really good resource for anyone interested in manufactured housing, or if you're working I think with legislators, this is a really good resource to use with them so they can look up their area and understand what's going on with manufactured housing in their specific area. And I think a lot of people don't know that we have this, and it was a lot of work. So please use it if it is a good resource for you.
Any other questions? Well, I know we have quite a few Community Foundation folks on the call, so thank you all for joining. I was really excited to highlight the partnership with the Whitefish Community Foundation. I think there's so much potential for community foundations and nonprofit partners to do work like this, where we see a need and you have a connection to local donors who can be activated quickly. So that's something I'm really interested in continuing to explore with all of you. And also just, of course, we've got lots of great Rock USA colleagues on the call and state nonprofit folks and donors, investors, lenders. I really love seeing this cross-section of all of you great people we get to work with every day. So we don't know where this is going to lead, but there's something here and it's a thread we're going to keep pursuing. So do keep in touch if you're seeing these issues in your community, or if you're interested in trying to replicate or pick up on any of what we've learned and developed. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.